Ladies and gentlemen, Team Slovakia believes that for every democracy to be a proper democracy, this democracy has to include the opinion and the participation of its citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, in my speech, I'll first talk about why public participation is necessary in countries and what the status quo in the world today is, how many people about participate. Then I'll talk about the model, how we would come to do this, and then I will talk about the substantial points in our case. First of all, I'll explain the term social contract and how for it to work, the participation of citizens in a country is needed. Then I will move on to explain how this policy would ensure better policy making in general for the future, and after that the second speaker of our team will explain how this would incentivize a greater number of people to become interested in politics and so educate themselves on an individual basis. So ladies and gentlemen, first of all, in today's world, not many people altogether participate in elections, go vote. In the countries of the European Union, for example, this number is somewhere around 50%, sometimes slightly more, sometimes slightly less. In some countries of the world, the percentage of people who go vote is as small as 20 or 30%, no thank you sir, in some places of the world. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that this is not how it should be. For a democracy to work, more people should express their opinion and should participate, no thank you, in voting. How would this model work? Ladies and gentlemen, when talking about elections, we're talking about voting, we're talking about two distinct types. First of all, presidential elections, voting for the presidential candidates. Second of all, parliamentary elections. And both of these, ladies and gentlemen, require the majority or all of the population, ideally, to come to elections and to vote. If people, no thank you sir, we propose a model in which people who would not go vote would receive a substantial fine, which could be somewhere around $100, $200, $300, depending on what country it would be in and how the situation, the financial situation in that country is placed. What we need, it should be noted, is that we propose a model in which there would be an option of an empty ballot. An empty ballot, no thank you sir, that would mean that if a citizen decides to tick that ballot, it means that he does not agree with any of the candidates, with any of the parties, and he is, no thank you sir, ma'am, sorry, and he disagrees with all of them and does not want any of the parties to be in election. We believe this is extremely important because he is able to express his opinion. Nowadays, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of the people, and I'll talk about this later in my case, no thank you, do not go to vote because they are simply not interested or because they do not know about politics. And there's a great difference between not going to vote at all and expressing your opinion and saying that you do not agree with any of the candidates or with any, no thank you sir, of the parties. Of course, there could be some exceptions if a person is out of the country or if something has happened to him that he does not have to vote, like with any other thing that is mandatory in a country. So before I move on to the substantial points, I would just like to point out that there are countries where this works, for example Belgium or Australia, where it is mandatory to vote. And this policy has influenced people to go vote, and more people vote, and democracy in those countries is more representative of the people. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, social contract, a term you have probably used or heard of a lot of times. What is this social contract? Ladies and gentlemen, it is a contract between the government of a country and the citizens of that country. And in order for it to be full, it needs full participation on both sides. Social contract means that when a person, no thank you, is born into a country, he has guaranteed protection from that country, from the government of that country, safety from the government of that country, and he is able to trust that country. He puts part of it, or he sacrifices part of his own sovereignty and freedom for that country. He pays taxes and gets a lot in return. Part of what he gets in return is that the government takes care of him and the people who are in the government, especially if it is a democracy, which are the countries we are talking about in this debate, give the people, the citizens back what the citizens themselves chose, what they themselves voted for. And ladies and gentlemen, part of this requires full participation on the side of the citizens. No thank you, ma'am. Otherwise, it is only half of the social contract it is supposed to be. Not making it mandatory, ladies and gentlemen, means that we are making or creating elites, educated people who will be able to vote in the country, and therefore only their ideas, only their opinions will be represented in the government. Yes, sir?
Is it full participation when you just go there because you have to and tick a random box?
We do not believe, ladies and gentlemen, that people would just take a random box. We are, the people who vote are not small children, they are adults, people who are at least of 18 years of age. That means these people are capable of making rational decisions, and even if they might not know exactly everything about every single candidate or party, that does not matter, because there are there are significant distinctions between different candidates and different parties, whether a party is socialistic or whether that party is more of a right-hand party, is a big difference, and a difference that can be seen by people who are may not be the most educated people in that country. So, ladies and gentlemen, for there to be a full social principle on which society works, we need the full participation of the people and all of the opinions of everyone to be, represented in a democracy, because, ladies and gentlemen, it is a representative democracy, not simply a democracy of the educated elites. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, the people that do not vote, and this comes back to answering your POI, sir, do not vote for several reasons. First of all, no thank you, ma'am, there are the people who do not vote because they are non-affiliated. Perhaps they are frustrated with the governments, with the candidates, with the parties. Perhaps they just simply do not think any of them should be in power and vote for someone else. But, ladies and gentlemen, if these people choose not to vote, well, that is just a passive stance, sitting in your own house and not doing anything. If you disagree with something, you should have the chance of going out there and trying to change it. And this empty ballot is what those people under our model would choose to do. No, thank you, ma'am. However, the difference between the status quo and our model comes especially in the other group of people, who are people who don't vote either because they feel that they cannot make a difference when voting, or because they are simply uninterested in politics. Well, first of all, the people who feel they do not make a difference when voting would go vote, so they would make a difference, and they would also be incentivized to go vote because they would see this. So this group of people would go vote and would choose one of the candidates and would become more interested in politics, as our second speaker will talk about. And secondly, the people who are not interested in politics would be incentivized to look at politics more and to become interested in politics, because we believe, ladies and gentlemen, that even if some of these people would choose to cross out the empty ballot on their voting paper, this is a great difference between doing this and sitting at home and doing nothing, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that, for example, when 40 or 50% of the country does not go vote, that is a great number of people, several million in countries. Not all of these would cross out the empty ballot. We believe that even if it was a majority of these people, it is still a great difference between staying at home and caring nothing about politics and going there and crossing out and choosing something and expressing your opinion, making your democracy more representative. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this motion is a load of ballots. Ballots which people didn't want to take. Ballots which do not represent the people. Ballots which harm democracy. And it is because of this that we oppose compulsory voting in national elections. Now today, Team Opposition bring you a 3-point case under the team line that voting is a choice which needs to be protected for the good of democracy. Our 3 points are the decision to vote, how this will lead to worse decision making, and how this engenders a bad relationship with politics. Now I'm going to talk to you about the first 2 points and actually going to deal with the third. But before I do that, let's have a look at what this first speaker said. Now I'm going to divide my rebuttal into 2 categories. Firstly, their model, and secondly, how they depicted voters. So firstly, their model, they told us that it's going to be a substantial fine, sort of $100, $200. We think basically you're holding the poor to ransom because they cannot afford not to vote. You're saying if you choose not to vote, then you're not going to eat next week. We think people on the minimum wage, this is a real concern. We think if you're rich, you can still choose not to vote because it's not a very big sum for you. And they told us how they're going to have a none of the above box, because choosing not to vote is different to ticking a box saying, I don't want to vote. We don't see this logic, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think it's expressing, oh, I don't like these politicians. We think it's just expressing, I don't care. I've been made to come here, I don't want to be here. So we think this doesn't, we don't really understand how this changes things. And then also we assume this applies to every country. I think this is going to be a real problem in developing countries. Because firstly, they've not got the resources to force everyone to do this. But also we think like corruption could be a real issue in these elections, but more on that later. Now let's look at how they described voters. Because they told us about the social contract, that the government looks after people who vote. Well, you also look after children who don't vote. We just don't think this is true. And then we were told how this is about the government giving them what they want, personal freedoms, their choice. But then we think the government should allow them to choose not to vote.
Ma'am.
We think this is a legitimate choice. And they've also told us that these voters, they're going to make good decisions suddenly. We think it's a rational decision for a lot of people not to vote. We don't understand why this is a bad decision. If you think it's good for yourself, then presumably it is. Then they've told us how this is suddenly going to change the minds of those who don't vote. Because those who feel they can't make a difference will be made to vote and then suddenly feel like they're making a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, if they didn't think their vote was suddenly going to sway an election, they're still going to think that. This doesn't change their mindset. Then moreover, they've told us that this incentivises people to vote. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's a 40-year-old man who sat through 10 elections and felt, I don't care and I'm not bothered about voting, why when he's being made to vote is he suddenly going to think, oh, I now care about politics. I now want to spend my weekend researching all the parties and their policies.
Madam.
Yes.
It still doesn't contradict the concept that we as a government want to know the opinion of every single individual in the country.
Okay, we think those who don't vote have told you their opinion, they just don't care. Now on to my substantive material. Firstly, how the decision to vote. Because ladies and gentlemen, we think it's wrong when the government forces people to do something. We see the exception to this is if it's overwhelmingly in your own interest or that of society. We don't see voting falling into this. Because we think the point of democracy is to empower people to make decisions. And just because you oppose a party in government doesn't mean you automatically support the opposition parties. We think actually the act of choosing not to vote is legitimate because people have real reasons for doing so. Firstly, because there might just be no party that represents them and their views. We think this is especially a problem in countries where they have bipartisan politics. For example, like the US and Japan, where it really is a choice just between two parties. We think if you're a voter in the middle of the spectrum, neither of those parties may really appeal to you. Secondly, we think there are a lot of people who just aren't interested in politics. Like, a lot of people wouldn't want to spend their summer holiday in a classroom in Scotland debating about politics. We think that's fine. Like, if they don't think politics have a real impact on their lives and they don't care, why should they bother? But then also think, thirdly, there's a cost-benefit analysis to be made when you vote. Because it takes your time and it takes effort to research the parties and go and vote. We think a lot of people simply don't perceive it to have enough of an impact on their lives to be worth their time doing so. And if people don't think their vote is going to make a difference, why force them to do something that doesn't change their opinion at all and just wastes their time? So ladies and gentlemen, also, there are a lot of spoiled ballots because if you sorry, not spoiled ballots, but just taking this box that says, I do not care. We don't think that changes people's opinion. We don't think that helps the political debate because it's people saying, I didn't want to be involved in this conversation in the first place. Democracy gives everyone the right to choice. And this extends to choosing not to participate in that democratic discussion. But now on to my second point of why this engenders worse decision making. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we don't want lack of access stopping people getting involved with politics. We want as many people who want to vote, we want all of those people to vote. But we think those who are voting need to make informed decisions. Because we don't think representation is just everyone voting. We think it's people voting for policies they have researched and for politicians who represent them best and their views. We think if you're voting for someone who doesn't represent you, then clearly that's not representation. So we think it's really important that the populace do care, that they are informed. But let's compare this to the people who proposition are now making votes. Because it's those who simply don't care. And we think this separates into three groups. First, there'll be those people who are really annoyed that their time is being wasted. Right, so they vote for the joke clown party who send dogs to political conferences. Or they just say, I don't care. We don't think that helps the decision making. Then secondly, there are those who are easily swayed. Because under the status quo, they don't really care about politics. They see it as worth their time. So I think their decisions are going to be really rash and not really based on something. So it'll be driving home from work and you see a shiny billboard poster and say, they're quite good looking, I'll vote for them. Yes.
So what do you think? What the state should do about the people who do not care, who do not participate in the system at all?
Well, firstly, that's a legitimate decision. But secondly, if you think there are groups that aren't being represented, more education, encourage them to vote. Have like voter registration drives. Don't force them to vote if they don't want to. So we think there are easily swayed people who vote for sort of reactionary statements like, we'll take away all the immigrants from the country and we'll stop conversing with those people you don't like. Then we think the third group are those who simply weren't as interested, but now, especially in developing countries, political parties can buy their vote. They can say, well, you didn't think it was worth your time in the first place, but now you're being made to, you might as well make $10. Why not profit from it? We think that's not representing anyone but the political parties. So this doesn't help the political discussion, and this actively damages it because it increases the amount of corruption in that dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, I've shown you that it's legitimate to choose not to vote. I've shown you that this leads to worse decision making. And because the foundation of democracy is choice, this motion destroys that choice. Thank you.
Has basically only very slightly touched our model case and brought up some points that we are very, very likely to refute. So, let me start. Model. They have told us that concerning our model, we're just making the rich people still able to buy off this necessity for them to vote. But what we see is that this is not the real issue, because if there will be some people that will be willing to pay the fine, then okay, let's make them. That's a technicality, and that is not something that applies to the majority of population. There is a very small part of the population which is able to waste 300 or 500 pounds for a vote, for 1 day, for 5 minutes of this activity. So we don't consider this to be important at all. And we are sorry to hear this technicality to be brought up. And there are more technicalities, because they were talking about corruption. But ladies and gentlemen, corruption happens today. Today you can buy votes of people all around the world, not only in the developing countries. We don't see this to be a major issue in this debate either. So we rather would focus on the most important issues and leave the technicalities behind. No, thank you. Okay, except for this, they have already told us that the empty ballot choice or none of the above choice makes no difference, but at the same time they were talking about how people have the right to not choose anybody. What we are doing with this is still making it possible for them to express their opinion that they do not agree with anybody else, but at the same time we are incentivizing a major group of these non-voters that are not voting today to make a decision and to vote under our model. And Hanka has divided these models, has divided these people, these non-voters today, into 3 categories. The first category, which basically, no thank you, doesn't agree with the situation, is maybe somehow demotivated because their representatives are not making what they want, will simply choose the empty ballot. But then there are people who really do not care about the political situation. They have more important issues in their lives than just go and vote. But by making them by incentivizing them, they are very likely to understand that this is a duty and they have to think about it up to a point. And this is very crucial in this debate. No, thank you. We need to incentivize the people to think in the first place. And these people, up to a point, they realize that really politics is what makes real differences in their lives. And therefore one part of the population, which is today basically not interested in it, will vote. What they have told us to this is that these people will make some irrational decisions. But isn't it like this today? Everybody who votes today is highly educated. Do really all the people that vote today know about every single part of the policy making? We think that this point is completely irrelevant from their side, because what they want is just make the educated people and the most, maybe richest people able to vote, and then the people who do not care or do not have the sufficient information not to. Don't you agree?
So why would you encourage people who don't care so much that they don't even turn up?
Well, we want to encourage these people because their lives is set in a different pattern. You don't understand this because you are a person that would be very likely to vote in these elections. But what we are saying is that the great majority of population just has many other things to take care about, and voting, no thank you, is not maybe their main issue. But with this incentive coming into the play, these people are going to realize the importance. And this is not just like empty words. These people know that politics, up to a point, issues decisions that they care influence them. So, for example, if these lower class people will see a socialist party in the parliament, they will be very likely to vote for the socialist party. And we think that this is their right, and that they will initially do it. We believe that this is no, thank you. That Team England considers voting for maybe the populist or socialistic parties to be wrong, but we believe that these parties have a very, very significant place in today's politics, and that because of this, their substantial point of decision making fails.
Sorry, on that point.
No, thank you. In addition to this, elections take place once in 5 years. So once these will be issued, or well, in different intervals in different countries. But what I'm about to say is that there is a long period during which these people could really get interested into the politics, and it will not require them to sit, no thank you, during their summer holidays in some classes in order to understand it. It will just require to pay some more attention to what is already in the newspaper or what is already in the TV. No thank you. So, no thank you. Except for that, they have never touched our social contract part, which we think is it's very unprofessional, because we believe that social contract is, no thank you, that every society is based upon, and that governments are here just because every person individually would be not able to sustain on themselves. Some philosophers has referred to this as a natural state, and in order to not be in this natural state where we would have to kill each other, we have the states to take care of us. No thank you. No thank you. But in order for the government to take care of every single person in the country, this person needs to issue and to express his opinion first. And no thank you. By incentivizing these people to do so, we are essentially achieving these results. Now, let's move to my third substantial point, which is the educational, and no thank you, educational value of this whole thing. We believe that by incentivizing or even forcing these people to vote, these people are very likely to get involved into the political process up to a point. They are very likely to read newspapers, very likely to watch TV, because once they have this duty to vote, they are not going to, not all of them are going just to say, oh, I don't care anyway, no thank you. They will say, okay, since I need to go to vote, I will make as much as possible to make my vote count and make this vote as important and as educated as possible. And it is in a sense making these people more responsible, not only more responsible citizens, but also more responsible people. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are aiming to is that since these people will see that participation in the public matters, these people will actually be very likely to involve into this situation and to become this, no thank you, these very important parts of the whole process. So, okay, to clean up, what Team Slovakia has told you in this debate is that the very, very principal point of social contracts makes our governments to really make everything possible in incentivizing people to go to vote. And even if we achieve only small results, what we don't believe that we are achieving small results, we actually believe that we are motivating a very substantial part of the population to go to vote, we believe that this is our duty as a government to ensure that this happens. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first point on which we believe that we are winning the debate, because Team England has never rebutted this. Later on, we believe that our model is very strong and it stands, and that giving people the option to not vote for a country, for a given person, doesn't mean that all of the people that do not vote today are going to take this option, and that we are just going to specifically see which people are really disappointed with the political situation. And in the third place, we believe that these people are rational, that with the 18 years of age, you already have some potential and capital to do rational decisions, to know what is good for you, and therefore that these votes will be educated. Ladies and gentlemen, for all of these reasons, we beg you to propose.
I'm a bit lazy And if my mom tells me I have to clean my bedroom, I'm not going to suddenly become so interested that I'll also clean the kitchen too. And we think it's the same for voters. Because I'll do it because I have to, and I'll do it begrudgingly. It's the same for disinterested voters. There is no link, and no link has been shown, between forcing people to vote and a sudden spurt of interest. That's why today we oppose this motion. Now I'm going to do three things in my speech. First, I'm going to rebut what we heard from the second proposition speaker. Secondly, I'm going to rebuild Alice's case. And finally, I'm going to make a point about the bad relationship with politics which this encourages. So first, let's move on to rebuttal. So his response to Alice's model challenges were that paying more money is for some reason a technicality. Well, firstly, he conceded that there will be some people who have more money who will take the fine and not vote. So that's our issue today. Why should there be people who can afford to do this being allowed not to vote, and people who can't, for whom losing this money is really damaging, having to take this forcing? No, thank you. Now, in response to the corruption challenge, what he told us was, like, it already happens right now. But what we're saying is you're making more and more people open to it. You're taking the people who currently aren't interested and allowing them to be bribed, because they have to go there, so there's a chance for them to be bribed on their way. But finally, in terms of a definitional challenge, we told him about this sort of thing about the empty ballot, and how their response was, well, yeah, you're telling them you don't care. We don't see how this is any more substantial, and that's exactly what Alice was saying to you. We don't think how it makes it any more substantial, no thank you, and we think it's actually a waste of time as a result. Now, if we move on to what he said in his actual substantive point, I'm going to rebut this some more in my actual case, but I'll go over it very quickly. Now, we think the whole foundation of his point was based on the assertion, which he said in his own words, they are very likely to understand. Exactly. That's an assertion. They've decided that suddenly, because you force these people to vote, they're suddenly going to have a spurt of interest. Because I'm going there anyway, I might as well do a few more things and get some research done too. His response, he also said about this, you have a long period of time. I mean, you have 5 years, so you have a lot of time to get this research done, but exactly, that's the time in which you have a lull in terms of your political interest, and that's when the populism starts to come in. When you come towards an election, you see one poster, and that's what influences you. No, thank you. But finally, he told us this is true because you start feeling like you have a duty. Because naturally, when the state forces you to do things, it makes you feel like you have a duty. No, that's not what happens in many situations. We think the youth of today in many situations are dislocated from the state because it forces them to do things. And this is exactly what this will do. But I'll cover that more in my point. But as well as that, their entire case was actually predicated on this point. Their case about the social contract as well was predicated on this because it assumes people will vote, and people will vote in a substantial way. In fact, what we think people will do, because they're so disinterested, and because they're not suddenly going to become interested, is they will make an insubstantial vote. They might spoil the ballot or something like that, which is exactly what Alice was talking to you about, and which we have no response to. Now, speaking of that, we move on to what Alice said in her case and their responses to that. No, thank you. So I'm going to take this in terms of Alice's 2 points. Her first point was about people making a legitimate decision. So firstly, they told us that this is because of a lack of information, and we think that's a completely different issue to what Alice was talking about. She herself said that when there's a lack of information, exactly what we propose is sort of campaigning that will encourage people to get into politics. That's exactly what politicians are doing right now and need to do more. That's exactly what we propose. But then what they told us was, no thank you, but they actually had no engagement with what she said in this point about the principle of actually having the freedom to make a choice. We have choice, which is exactly what her response to the social contract was. So we don't think it makes sense for them to tell us she said nothing about that. But as well as that, they didn't respond to all the groups she was talking about. Those who have no party that represent your views, they didn't respond to that. Those who are disinterested, they responded to that, but that was, I rebutted that already. And finally, no thank you, they didn't respond to the cost-benefit analysis, because they seem to throw it off as a technicality in response to their definition. Because $300 to someone who's earning a minimum wage is somehow now a technicality. We don't think that makes sense. Now, her second point was about worse decision-making. And she gave you a lot of examples of people, but the only group of people we had a response to was those who are easily swayed by populism. They completely misrepresented us by saying instead of populism, socialism. No, thank you. We think those are pretty different things. What we were saying is when one poster can influence you to make a decision, that's not an appropriate political decision, no thank you, and that's in no way fulfilling this social contract anyway. Socialism is a political view, populism is an unfair way of influencing people. But as well as that, when Alice talked about people who don't care, just filling in a spoiled ballot or something like that, we had literally no response to that, and we'd like to hear from them about that. But now I'm going to move on to my substantial case, about the sort of bad relationship with politics this encourages. And this has direct clash with our second proposition speaker's point. So we think they need to show a significantly large link between voting and suddenly creating interest. We don't think it's enough for them to show a few more people will be interested, because that doesn't weigh out the massive harms we've been talking to you about the massive groups of people who aren't interested and will spoil their ballots. And we don't think they've actually done that. They haven't shown this sort of link. It's been a complete assertion. Whereas we can give you examples of people who would actually do this sort of spoiling ballot thing. Firstly, we think of the sort of disinterested people. We don't think that makes sense to say that from right now doing nothing, they're suddenly going to start doing loads. They're suddenly going to actually create such an interest in politics that they're able to make a substantial decision. What we think they'll do is all they have to do because of the state and no more. And they haven't shown us why that's not true. But we also think it encourages an active dislocation with politics. Because what we think is politics, for good involvement in politics, you need to have voluntary involvement. And why will this not happen? Firstly, because this becomes a chore. It becomes like something you have to do every 5 years, and it's actually something that you don't create an interest in. We think there's less pursuit of an active interest, which we think would come about if, for example, you were young and you weren't initially voting, then you actually developed the interest, and a few years later you decided to vote. That sort of thing is gone, and this sort of becomes like paying your taxes, something you regularly have to do and is a chore. But there's also an issue in terms of the state forcing you to do this sort of thing. There is no sort of reason, because we think there's no sort of like, when the state forces you to do this sort of thing, it creates resentment towards the state, as if they're making you just to do this sort of thing, and we're having no response from them about why this isn't true. And we think that's an issue, because that creates further resentment against the political system we're meant to be voting in. Go on.
Australia has compulsory voting. Do you think that people of Australia are resenting their government just because they have to go to the elections?
We think that people who aren't interested in politics and have to go anyway, like the youth of Australia, some of the youth of Australia who don't want to vote, are. That's exactly what we're saying today. Thank you very much. But as well as that, we think it's even worse when you actually, as a young person, have to pay if you don't want to vote. So basically, you have to pay because you don't like a particular sort of thing that you're interested in. I don't like sport that much. I don't want to have to pay for that, ladies and gentlemen. But we're talking about two sorts of groups particularly. Now, I've already gone over the young, because we think they already see politicians as these old cronies, forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. Adding to this, and actually adding to this in a specifically political way, is actually going to be damaging. But there are also other groups in society who vote less and are disengaged from politics. Just people who don't have an interest in politics as a specific social group. We think for both of these people, politicians need to make a real effort to reach out. For example, we saw Obama campaigning. He said, yes, we can. He didn't say, yes, we have to. And that's exactly what we're saying today. Because you need to actively create a sort of interest in politics and actively appeal to the people. Because this sort of campaigning is a legitimate way that makes people interested, and makes people interested to such an extent that they can actually make a substantial vote, rather than just being affected by populism. So voting is a choice which must be respected for the good of democracy, and that's why today we ask you to tick the box for the opposition.
Gentlemen, we believe that Team England is quite lazy, because they believe that this world is about having all of the luxury or not having any responsibility at all. It is the life where you do not have any liability towards people who you are responsible to people and to the state that provides you with services. We believe that this is not the world we're living in. And what will I do in my speech is that I will firstly talk about what is the paradigm of the country that we want to live in. Whether we want to have the complete free will, or we believe that people should have the compulsory voting in the country. Secondly, I will talk about why people are able to make informed decisions, why the decision won't be hasty, and further of all, I'll talk about what will be the implication for the policy making in the country, and where the benefit of this fact will outweigh the case of team opposition. Well, first of all, Hannah in the very first speech told you that we believe that we are living in countries and in the states where the democratic government provides us with security, with services such as healthcare, education, and in return we have to make decisions how to shape these countries. And we believe that the problem that we see throughout this world today is that there are groups of people who are simply not taking part in this decision making. And we believe that it is a problem, because we believe that if a democratic country wants to be legitimate in itself, if the country wants to represent society and want to call itself a democratic country who actually represents the people of the area, we believe that you have to have a vote of every single individual. We believe that it is increasingly important to have even the resentment through the empty ballot so that the people show you that they resent any political structure in the country, so that you know as country what the people in your area thinks.
Sorry, on that point.
Yeah.
How does knowing people didn't want to vote help anything?
Okay. What team of opposition came and told us was that, well, people themselves should have the free will, that this is what the people need, that people should have the right to decide whether they will come or not. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this is not such an expenditure for the people to pay. We don't think that spending 10 minutes of walking to the election room in your neighborhood is such a horrible thing to do. We believe that you can postpone things such as watching your favorite TV show in the evening. You think that you as an individual have 10 minutes of your life to decide what will be the way and what will be the future of your country. What will be the, thank you sir, what will be the people who will be making policies in future. And this is increasingly important because especially countries who are currently in the world, such as Hannah already told you, are having election participancy rate of 50%, of 60%. We do not believe that if 60% of people say something in the country, it is irrelevant opinion that should be took into account. Because, as I told you, it is not a legitimate democracy to operate in the country. Secondly, we believe that what we have to tell you is that the people who will come to these election rooms will not make hasty decisions. We believe that it is not like that these people are completely dumb, that they do not have any rational thinking whatsoever, no thank you sir. We believe that these people are adult people who can decide what they want in their countries. Those are people, no thank you sir, those are people who have at least primary or secondary education in the developed world. Those are the people who have some background, who have opinion about what they want their country to be shaped. Whether they want it to be a very socialist country, who help everyone in the society, or that they want it to be a very strong state that provides, for example, free taxes to small taxes to businesses, so that they incentivize the economy. We believe that those are all the things that people can understand. Moreover, we believe that what team of opposition told us is that we have to rather make campaigns informing people so that they go to elections. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this is not mutually exclusive with what we are doing. No, thank you. Sure, we believe that you can have compulsory voting and at the same time ensuring that each and everyone has the information necessary to make the decision. So this is not the problem. Moreover, we believe that if team of opposition starts to claim that each and every one of the people who are not voting today will be influenced and will be affiliated by the populist parties, well, ladies and gentlemen, if it would be so easy to influence each and every individual, then each and every individual who is not voting today would be already influenced by these people. We believe that people can decide and can differentiate what is a populist reason, what is a populist campaign, etc. No, thank you, sir. So we believe that people can make this decision, and therefore no harm to the decision making would be done whatsoever. And we believe that it is not such a huge harm for these people at all. Yes, madam.
If the education supplements are going to be so successful in getting people involved in politics, then why also force them?
Well, we believe that if you force them, they will find out in the long run, it will not become an obligation to do. It will become a normal part of the life that you go every 5 years to the elections. It is not something that people will find as, irritating. We believe that it is not that demanding of your time, of your work, etc. And the last point that I want to elaborate on is whether there will be an implication on policy making and whether the country will be operating on a better scale. Well, what we believe that if you have the opinion of the entire population, you can make decisions that appeal and that influence the most of the society. And then, we believe that it is especially important that these people who are not taking part in the election go to the election and take part. Because in that case, there is space for the people and for the political subject, for the political organization to appeal to these people, because otherwise those are the ones who never attend elections. On the other hand, if you have a system where they have to go to the elections, there will be more incentive to increase the amount. No, thank you, sir. the amount of political organization who will try to appeal to these people, who will try to appeal to these groups of people who are going to the election and would not appear anyway. So we believe that this will result in one thing, that the parliaments that are in these countries would be operating on much better scale, because more of the opinions of the country would be represented, and therefore the policy making of Lancashire would be more efficient, because it would include the opinions and the demands of the whole population. And this is what will make the people themselves more confident and more pleased with the country that they are living in. So we believe that the overall effect of discontent and of unhappiness with the country and with the political system will not appear. People will be simply more happy, more content with the government that they have, because it will be the true government that represents the whole population. So what we've told you as team of proposition in this debate is that we provided you with a model that makes people go to the elections. We told you that if government wants to operate on a really democratic level, they have to create a system where each and every individual casts their vote. We believe it is increasingly important to have the liability so that people share their opinion, so that the government has the legitimacy to operate. Secondly, we told you that hasty decision won't appear, and the technicalities, the team of opposition remarks, are not that important. And lastly, we told you that this will only result in more content society that will operate on better policy making. For all these reasons, we believe that this motion stands. Thank you.
From the first proposition speaker, we heard that democracy needs the opinions and participation of as many people as possible to function. And from this very first line, they revealed that they've conflated a high voter turnout statistic with good politics. And they seem to think that participation is the same as representation. And ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to explain exactly why that doesn't make any sense. So, what am I going to do? First, I'm going to look at whether this is a legitimate choice to decide you don't want to go out and vote at all. And in that I'll look at this idea of a social contract, which we have. Then I'm going to look at the effect on voters. Firstly, whether it develops interest in politics, and secondly, whether it develops good decisions, and thereby a good government. So let's look at whether it's a legitimate choice to decide you don't want to vote. And Alice told you in some detail about many different reasons that people might not be interested in politics, might not think that it affects their lives, might not think that it's worth the effort to go out and find out what they need to in order to make an informed decision, that they might not think there's a party out that's going to represent them. And we actually had a speaker on the proposition, I'm sorry I can't remember who it was, who said, no thank you, that a great majority of people have many other things to do rather than go out and vote. Exactly. What the difference is that we value their freedom to choose that option. They tried to tell us that there's a social contract, so that people have a duty to go out and vote. But a social contract is about paying taxes and then having the government do things that you want in return, and that's what they said. We actually think what people want is to have respect for their basic freedoms and the values that they think are most important. If there was a referendum which decided that compulsory voting wasn't a good thing, and that the people didn't want that, would you then accept that?
How can a government do right policy making without all parts of the society, all sectors, to be represented in it? And that's what we are aiming for.
It decides policies on the basis of the people that think that it's worth their time to go in and worth their effort to go in and input their opinion into that process. We don't think it's unacceptable for a government to lay down laws which aren't agreed to by every single member of a society. If that was the case, democracies wouldn't work because, there are minority parties. There are people that don't agree with the party in power. We just don't think that stands up as a principle of democracy. I'm not a betting man, but I think if we took a straw poll in this room, people would say that they don't want to be forced every time there's an election to go out to the voting booth. And because people value those personal freedoms, we think that they need to be respected. And we think that that the fact that they included a none of the above option on their ballot actually sort of accepts and concedes that it is a legitimate choice to say, I'm not interested in voting for any of these parties because I don't like them or because I just don't care about the politics. And they've said it's really important because we can interpret this as the registering of a firm opinion against the establishment, and that maybe that would incentivize new parties with new opinions to respond to this group. We just don't simply think that's the case at all. What they should interpret it as is a continuation of whatever the reason was that these people weren't voting in the first place. And that's the only thing that you're going to get. You're going to get a statistic of how many people don't care about politics through that method. But we don't think it's okay to violate people's personal freedoms because this is such an important choice. But let's look at the effect on voters. And firstly, let's look at the interest in politics. And there's a few different groups of voters that we think are important. Like, we heard very early on about people who feel that they can't make a difference in politics. And now they're going to have to make a difference. So somehow they'll feel that they are making a difference. We actually think it's very reasonable to think, like, the odds of my vote being the one that sways an election in the favor of my minority party isn't that likely. Like, the chance that my vote is going to either affect the outcomes of the election, government policy, or at even more of a stretch, my own life, is actually quite a reasonable way of looking at the situation. And we think that that is a decision that is based on reasons and is based on logic. Unlike the sort of arbitrary connection we've had from side proposition about this sort of magical change of opinions that's going to happen once they're made to do this. No, thank you, sir. Like, there's another group of people who say they don't like any party at all, but maybe they are interested in politics. And after you put this motion into place, like, they'll still care about politics, they still won't appreciate any of the major parties, and the only difference is that they've been forced to take time out in order to register that in the voting booth that they don't care about. We think probably most important of a large group of people who are, like, generally disinterested in politics. Like most people my age, I'm 17. Unlike most people my age, thanks, guy. I care about politics, right? And we don't think that that's just simply something that we can assume about most people. So why is that the case? Why are people uninterested? Because they feel distant from politics. It's because sometimes they feel like the state is out against them, and they don't appreciate what the state does for them. Just wait a minute, sir. It's because maybe they can't relate to politicians. They don't think that their views are respected by politics. So how do we reach out to these people who don't feel like the state cares for them? Is it by bringing down, like, the heavy hand of the state to force them to vote in elections? No, ladies and gentlemen, we need to reach out to these people and let them come into politics rather than force them in. You still want them? Okay, sorry, I left you hanging there for all. So we don't think that we should make this like a choice. We don't think we should make it like filing taxes. We should make it a choice where people can develop the active role in politics, which we think is even more crucial. When people sort of feel the voluntary interest in politics, that's when they start to go out and they volunteer for campaigns that they support. That's when they start to donate, like in the election, just wait a minute now, sir, to Barack Obama's campaign, which we thought actually really raised grassroots support. And that sort of voluntary interest in politics, which we think matters. Go ahead.
When talking about the free will of people, if people have free will, they would probably not want to pay taxes, though we make them to do so because we want them to participate in society equally and rationally.
I'm not sure I understand how the accepting that people should pay taxes in return for government services that they can't provide for themselves, like roads, for example, means that they should have to go vote in an election. I just didn't see the connection there. Sorry. If you'd like to explain it more later, that would be great. But let's look at the decisions that are actually made and why we don't think that these are going to be held. Like, we have this idea that at the moment it's sort of somehow just like educated and rich elite who are going out to vote and like run all of politics. And we just simply don't think this is true. But like, even if it was, we think the solution to this is to allow free access. And that's what we told you. And this is where the sort of accusation that our proposition didn't matter. What we're saying is we support like voting being accessible. We support people being aware of how to vote and where they can vote, and we support that they're able to do so. What we think is really important is that they have the choice to do so or not. If they don't, we actually think this is a really dangerous consequence for governments as a whole because of populism coming into play. Right? And we sort of firstly had this sort of confusion between populism and socialism. But what we're really saying is that if people at the moment have no interest in who they elect, we don't think there's any reason that they would magically turn this around. Actually, it's not going to be cleaning his kitchen, ladies and gentlemen. These people are going to have the same level of interest in politics. They're not going to engage in a deep discussion of the topics, but instead, slogans like you talked about, simple ideas like low taxes are going to grab their imagination. But they won't be able to, or they won't have the interest to look into that and realize the full consequences of a policy like that. And that's what we think is really dangerous about these like simple slogans, like no immigration, closing down our borders. And that's the kind of reasons that people are going to make decisions if they're uninterested in politics and they're only at the voting booth because you forced them to be there. So voting is a choice which must be respected for the good of democracy as a whole.
Ladies and gentlemen, to win this debate today, Proposition had to do two things. Prove that it's legitimate and fair for governments to force people to vote, and that this improves politics. They've not done this, and this is why they have lost the debate today. We've shown you that voting is a choice which must be respected for the good of democracy, and that today is why we've won the debate. I'm going to be asking two questions. Firstly, should people be forced to vote? And secondly, will this lead to better politics? The answer to both those questions is no. So on to the first question. Because we heard from opposition about the social contract, that because the government does things first, we must vote for them or another party. That the government needs to know what people think in order to be a fair and representative government. But ladies and gentlemen, we've shown you that the role of democracy is to give people basic freedoms and choices, and that choosing not to vote is a choice that is legitimate and that people can take. But we think the reason we won this question, is because proposition conceded this when they said we're going to have a none of the above option. We think it's fair that if people don't want to vote for anyone, they simply don't vote. Well, we think not going to the polling station is also a way of not voting, and one that doesn't waste people's time and doesn't annoy them. So we think, therefore, they should not be forced to vote. But now on to the second issue of the debate. And will this lead to better politics? I'm going to divide this into two strands. Firstly, in terms of voters, and then the results of elections. So let's look at voters, because we've heard that voters will become more interested, that they'd suddenly develop these really complex political views that they just assumed because they didn't care, but now they suddenly do. Well, we think firstly we've shown you why it's legitimate for them not to care, but secondly, we don't understand why forcing someone into the voting booth suddenly means once they're in there, they're going to develop an opinion. We heard from what proposition that, we're going to educate these people, and then they'll care. But ladies and gentlemen, if the issue is education, then you educate them and get them interested in politics. You don't force them to do something, because then we think that does make people resent the act. They do see it as a chore, and it's something they don't want to engage with. But moreover, if people don't think it matters enough to bother going to the voting station, if they don't think their vote is going to change elections, they're still going to think this now. Whether or not the government is telling them you should be voting, these people are still going to think there's no worth, there's no value in you voting. So we don't think this improves the voters' views of politics. But now let's look at the results of these elections, because we think a lot of propositions material focused on why governments need to be representative and why this is really important. The first thing we showed you how actually voters who do vote for a party will often have quite reactionary, sort of knee-jerk responses. So it won't be well thought out votes that really do represent them and get the policies that they actually would want to see implemented. We think it'll just be judging on a poster or a sort of vox pop from one of the politicians. But moreover, I asked them here a point of information. Why is knowing that people don't care valuable? They failed to respond to this. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if people don't vote, if you don't have 100% turnout, politicians now know that people don't care about politics. We don't think this changes how they enforce policy, because there's nothing to respond to. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have an opinion, why does it matter if the government know that because you've ticked a box or not? Now, we've shown you why our arguments are better than opposition, and we've hopefully engaged with those of you who weren't interested in the debate in the beginning. We're not going to force you to, but I urge you to vote for team opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the word democracy is derived from the word people. Therefore, we believe that in democracy, people are the most important, and the opinion of people is the most important. And what team of proposition, Team Slovakia, has been standing for today is that unless we incentivize and make everything possible to make as many people as possible to vote, then we're failing as a government in the first place. Therefore, we believe that this debate was, in the first place, about the principle. About the principle whether government has the right and has the duty to incentivize people to vote. And because we believe that according to the social contract, only if every single person takes part in politics, then the government is legitimate. Therefore, we believe that on this point, we have really been stood strong. What team of opposition has been telling to this is that, well, not all people will make rational decisions. But what we believe is that it is the right of these people to not make completely educated decisions, that it is already happening in today's democracy, that not all people read books about philosophy and political concepts, and not read newspapers every day in order to make the most rational decisions of all. But what we have shown you, and we have proven you throughout this debate, is that every person has an affiliation in his heart, that he believes that the government should either go this way or this way. And it is not such a hard concept to understand that a regular person could not elaborate on it and could not think about it. What is the problem today is that many people have such busy lives that very, very just unimportant things make them not vote. It is maybe because at that day they just want to sit and stay in their houses and watch TV throughout the whole day, because up to a point they believe, well, one vote will not change anything. But when they will know that every single person in the country has to vote, then they will believe that their vote is going to make as much difference as the vote of every single person in the given country. Ladies and gentlemen, what we believe is that, therefore, that what we are achieving is that these people are going to just take those 10 minutes, go to the voting room and cast the ballot. What Team of England has failed in this debate is that they have just thrown at us some technicalities that it is not right to force people to go vote, but therefore there is that option that they do not choose anything above. But what we believe is that the single act of forcing them, of motivating them and incentivizing them to go to vote will make the great portion of these people to cast the vote for one of the parties that they are affiliated with. We believe that the people that are so demotivated today, that because they believe that politicians are just useless, that yes, they will choose the none of the above option, and therefore we believe that it is their right. But in the first place, we believe that we as a government have the duty to make these people, to incentivize these people to go vote. But another technicalities that they have thrown at us was that, yes, it is very easy to pay for these votes or something like that, but it is already happening in many countries. For example, in Slovakia, yes, some parties pay for their votes, and I'm sure it's all around the world. But what we are saying is that this is something that we cannot get rid of, and this debate was about something completely different. We believe that because we've proven you that every person knows in his heart what is right for him, and it is at 18 years of age is enough for him to know this. Because we have proven you that a substantial part of people that today do not decide to vote because they are simply too lazy is going to do so, because we have given them the option of not choosing anybody to do so, and because we have stood for the proper democracy today, for the social contract. We believe that we are the team that has, after a long time, beaten England. Thank you very much.